The scent of old wood and damp plaster hung heavy in the air, a perfume Sarah was surprisingly growing fond of. Character, she called it, nudging Mark playfully as they stood in the grand, dusty entryway of their new home, or rather, their new project. The Victorian house, all sharp gables and peeling paint on the outside, loomed large on its overgrown lot, a sleeping giant of forgotten elegance. Inside, it was a maze of shadows, high ceilings, and floors that groaned underfoot, like an old man settling into his bones. They'd sunk nearly everything into the down payment, fueled by cheap takeout, Pinterest boards, and the romantic, slightly insane notion of restoring the neglected beauty to its former glory. Mark, ever the pragmatist, saw the cracked plaster and drafty windows. Sarah, the dreamer, saw potential, crown moulding beneath layers of paint, original hardwood hidden. Under stained carpet, a future filled with dinner parties and lazy Sunday mornings bathed in light from the tall, grimy windows. "Okay, team," Mark said, clapping his hands together, the sound echoing unnervingly in the cavernous space. "Operation Save This House starts now. You take the downstairs wallpaper assessment. I'll tackle the questionable structural integrity of the upstairs nursery." Sarah grinned, grabbing a scraper. "Deal, just try not to bring the whole ceiling down before lunch." He headed up the creaking staircase, toolbox rattling. The air seemed thicker upstairs, the silence deeper. He found the room at the end of the hall, likely a child's room once, judging by the faded floral wallpaper peeking out from behind newer, uglier layers. It felt still, resigned. Mark took a breath, hefted the sledgehammer, and eyed the section of wall beside the chimney, hollow-sounding, suspiciously newer than the rest. Time to see what secrets this old house was hiding. He swung. The plaster exploded inwards in a cloud of choking white dust. Mark coughed, waving it away, and peered into the cavity revealed. Not pipes, not wiring, but a small, dark space, deliberately constructed. He reached inside, his fingers brushing against something smooth and cool, wrapped in what felt like brittle, aged fabric, maybe oilcloth or heavy linen. Carefully he pulled it out. It was a bundle, roughly the size of a loaf of bread. As he unwrapped the stiff, yellowed cloth, the object within was revealed. A porcelain doll. It was startlingly well preserved, its painted cheeks still holding. A faint blush, tiny red lips pursed in a serene, almost smug expression. Glassy blue eyes, fringed with delicate painted lashes, stared fixedly ahead. Its yellow dress, though faded and dusty, was intricately detailed with lace at the collar and cuffs. "Sarah, you gotta see this," Mark called down, a weird mix of fascination and unease prickling his skin. Sarah hurried up the stairs, drawn by the excitement in his voice. "What is it? Did you find treasure?" She stopped short when she saw the doll cradled in Mark's hands. "Whoa, okay, that's something. Right?" Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Looks ancient, and kind of creepy, honestly." Sarah leaned closer, tilting her head. "It's incredible, though. Look at the detail. She must have been hidden in there for decades, a century." She reached out tentatively, touching the doll's cool porcelain cheek. Poor thing, stuck in the wall all alone. Despite its fixed stare, Sarah felt a strange pang of sympathy. "We should clean her up. She's part of the house's history." Mark hesitated, glancing back at the dark hole in the wall, then at the doll's unwavering gaze. He couldn't shake a feeling of intrusion, but Sarah was already beaming, envisioning it as a unique decorative piece, a story to tell. "All right," he conceded, "but you're cleaning it." Later, after a gentle wipe-down removed the worst of the grime, Sarah placed the doll on the high mantelpiece of the unused fireplace in the room. It sat there, small and still, overlooking the space they were transforming. As they worked, the afternoon light fading outside, Sarah sometimes glanced up, catching the glint of the doll's glass eyes in the dimness. Once she could have sworn she heard a faint sigh, like a settling floorboard, but deeper, almost sad. Probably just the old house, she told herself, turning back to her work, a faint chill tracing its way down her spine. A few days slipped by in a blur of dust, paint fumes, and aching muscles. The doll remained on the mantelpiece, a silent, watchful presence. Sarah tried to ignore the unease it stirred in her, focusing on the satisfying progress they were making. But the house seemed to resist settling into comfortable silence. Floorboards creaked when no one was walking. Doors sometimes drifted shut on windless afternoons, and then came the whispers. At first, Sarah thought she was imagining it, her mind playing tricks in the fatigue. A soft murmur, just on the edge of hearing when Mark was downstairs or outside. But one afternoon, alone in the upstairs hallway, sanding a doorframe, she heard it clearly. A small, high-pitched sound, almost like a question. "Mama?" Sarah froze, her heart hammering. She spun around. The hallway was empty. The door to the nursery, where the doll sat, was slightly ajar. That night she mentioned it to Mark, trying to sound casual. "This old house makes the weirdest noises, doesn't it?" He grunted agreement, focused on unclogging the kitchen sink. He hadn't heard anything, but things started moving. Mark's tape measure, left on the kitchen counter, turned up on the nursery mantelpiece, right beside the doll. Sarah's phone, which she was sure she'd left charging on the bedside table, was found sitting on the dusty floor at the doll's porcelain feet. Mark blamed their exhaustion, the chaos of renovation. Sarah wasn't so sure. The feeling of being watched intensified, a heavy pressure between her shoulder blades whenever she was upstairs alone. The breaking point came 3 nights later. They woke simultaneously, jolted from sleep by a shared sense of profound wrongness. The air in their bedroom was cold, stagnant. Sarah's breath hitched. At the foot of their bed, bathed in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, sat the porcelain doll. Its glass eyes seemed to gleam in the darkness, fixed directly. On them, it hadn't been there when they went to sleep. It was on the mantelpiece, 2 rooms away. Mark let out a choked gasp, scrambling backwards until his back hit the headboard. Sarah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, her eyes locked with the doll's unblinking stare. There was no rational explanation, no sleepwalking, no prank. It was simply there, an impossible, terrifying sentinel. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, Mark whispered, his voice hoarse with terror. "It's the doll, Sarah. It's the damn doll." The unspoken truth hung between them. They weren't alone in the house. Sleep offered little escape after that night. Every creak of the old house, every shadow seemed menacing, imbued with the doll's silent watchers. The fear was a cold knot in Sarah's stomach, a constant tension in Mark's jaw. They moved the doll back to the nursery mantelpiece, neither wanting it in their bedroom, but both inexplicably afraid to actually remove it from the house yet. First, they needed answers. Their renovation plans were abruptly put on hold, replaced by a desperate hunt for information. Mark spent hours online, digging through digitized local newspaper archives and census records for their address. Sarah, remembering a brief chat during their first week, decided to visit Mr. Henderson, the elderly man who'd lived next door for over 60 years. Mr. Henderson, frail but sharp-eyed, invited her into his meticulously kept living room, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and lemon polish. When Sarah hesitantly asked about the history of their house, specifically any tragedies or unusual occurrences, his expression grew somber. "Ah, the old Gable place," he sighed. "Sad history, that one. Especially concerning the Prestons who lived there. Oh, must have been back in the 20s. He recounted the story, corroborated later by Mark's online findings. A family named Preston had lived there. Their youngest daughter, Emily, was a quiet, solitary child, often ill. She rarely left the house and was intensely devoted to a porcelain. Doll her father, a traveling salesman, had brought back from Europe. Tragically, Emily succumbed to influenza during the harsh winter of 1923. She was only 8 years old. Her parents, heartbroken, moved away shortly after, unable to bear the constant reminders. Mr. Henderson remembered his own mother mentioning how Emily's mother swore the child's spirit never truly left, claiming she sometimes heard faint crying or saw glimpses of the girl near the nursery window, clutching her precious doll. Back home, sharing their findings, a chilling understanding settled over Sarah and Mark. It wasn't just a spirit. It was Emily. Lonely, perhaps confused Emily, tethered to the house and her beloved doll. While they searched, the Wi-Fi had cut out inexplicably several times, and a stack of printed records Sarah had placed on the table briefly vanished, only to reappear under a pile of renovation debris. Emily, it seemed, was aware of their prying. Knowing her name, her story, didn't lessen the fear. It deepened it, painting the haunting with strokes of sorrow and a creeping dread. They knew who haunted them, but what did Emily want with them, and why was her presence suddenly so strong? Knowing Emily's name didn't make living with her any easier. If anything, it amplified the oppressive atmosphere in the house. Every creak sounded like her footsteps, every shadow seemed to hold her form. The doll, sitting on the nursery mantel, felt less like an antique artifact and more like a loaded gun. They couldn't stand its silent judgment any longer. They had to get rid of it. Their first attempt was mundane, almost comical in its naivety. Mark wrapped the doll tightly in a black trash bag, drove 10 miles out of town, and buried it deep within a public dumpster behind a strip mall, feeling a surge of guilty relief. That evening, the house felt lighter, the air less charged. They slept soundly for the first time in days. The relief was short-lived. The next morning, the doll was sitting on their front porch swing, pristine except for a smudge of unknown grime on its cheek, its glass eyes fixed on the front door. Sarah screamed when she saw it. Mark felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This wasn't just residual energy. This was something conscious, deliberate, and powerful. Their next attempt was more desperate. Under the cloak of a moonless night, Mark dug a shallow hole in the furthest corner of the overgrown backyard and buried the doll, covering it quickly with earth and sod. He washed the dirt from his hands, trying to wash away the violation he felt. Retaliation was swift and terrifying. That night the house erupted. Doors slammed open and shut with hurricane force throughout the upper floor. Downstairs, picture frames flew off the walls, shattering on the floorboards. A blood-curdling shriek echoed from the empty nursery, a sound of pure childish rage and anguish that chilled them to their souls. They huddled together in their bedroom, listening to the spectral tantrum, paralyzed by fear. When an unnerving silence finally fell near dawn, they crept out. The house was a mess, and there, back on the nursery mantelpiece, sat the doll. Its yellow dress was stained with damp earth, tiny clumps of mud clinging to its porcelain hands and feet, and scratched. Crudely into the wooden mantel just below the doll was a single, jagged word, mine. The message was clear. Emily wasn't just attached to the doll. She considered them hers now, too. The house wasn't just haunted, it was occupied. Mark stared at the doll, then at Sarah's pale, tear-streaked face. The fear was now mixed with something else. The sickening realization that they had provoked her, that trying to escape had only tightened her grip, and that they were truly trapped. The scratched word on the mantelpiece felt like a brand, marking them as Emily's property. Desperation gnawed at Sarah and Mark. Living in the house had become an exercise in endurance, navigating invisible tripwires of spectral anger. They moved on autopilot, barely speaking, the silence thick with unspoken fear and the constant oppressive awareness of the doll's presence upstairs. They knew they couldn't coexist with Emily, but escape seemed impossible. They needed help. Mark, swallowing his skepticism, called Father Michael from the local Catholic church. The priest arrived, a kind man with weary eyes, armed with holy water and a worn prayer book. As he walked through the house, reciting prayers for peace and deliverance, the atmosphere grew heavy, almost resistant. Upstairs, near the nursery, the temperature plummeted, their breath misting in the air. A series of sharp, distinct raps echoed from inside the walls, seemingly mocking the priest's Latin verses. While Father Michael sprinkled holy water on the nursery door, the doll on the mantelpiece slowly, deliberately tilted its head, its glass eyes seeming to fix on him with cold animosity. The priest finished the blessing, clearly unsettled, but offered little comfort. "There's a deep sadness here," he admitted quietly at the door, "and something very possessive. My prayers might offer some protection, but this requires more than I can provide." He advised them to perhaps research the history further or even consider leaving. His visit seemed only to agitate Emily. That night, the psychological torment began. Sarah woke from a nightmare, convinced she'd heard Mark whispering that she was losing her mind, only to find him fast asleep beside her. Mark kept seeing fleeting shadows in his peripheral vision that looked disturbingly like Sarah, but vanished when he turned. Minor disagreements escalated into bitter arguments, fueled by exhaustion and a creeping paranoia that felt subtly encouraged by the house itself. Doors would stick when they tried to leave a room, lights would flicker ominously, and cold spots ambushed them in hallways. The house didn't just feel haunted, it felt actively hostile, complicit with the lonely spirit trapped within its walls. With the priest's blessing offering no real solace, and the entity seemingly growing bolder, manipulating their perceptions, the truth became starkly clear. No one was coming to save them. Outside help had failed. They were trapped, alone, with Emily and her rage, staring at each other across the dusty living room. The same grim understanding dawned in their eyes. If they wanted to survive, if they ever wanted to be free, they would have to find the key to stopping Emily themselves. Whatever dark secret that entailed, there had to be something more, some clue overlooked in their previous searches. Fueled by adrenaline and dwindling hope, Sarah and Mark turned the house upside down, focusing on the places untouched for decades. The damp, spiderweb-choked cellar, the dusty, suffocating attic under the eaves, tearing through rotting boxes and forgotten trunks left by previous occupants. Sarah's hand brushed against a small, leather-bound book tucked deep inside a dilapidated hatbox in the attic. It was a diary, Emily's mother's diary. With trembling hands, they read the elegant looping script, detailing a mother's love, her growing worry over Emily's persistent illness, and her daughter's obsessive attachment to the porcelain doll, Lady Eleanor. Then came the heartbreak of Emily's death, and subsequent chilling entries describing unsettling occurrences, whispers, footsteps, and the doll appearing inexplicably in Emily's empty bed. The final entries were frantic, describing how, in a moment of desperate grief and perhaps folk belief, she had sewn a lock of Emily's hair inside the doll's cloth body, hoping to keep a part of her daughter close forever. She wrote of her, growing fear that she hadn't preserved a memory, but trapped a tormented echo. The last page contained a tear-stained, fragmented plea. Fire, perhaps, the only way to release her. Forgive me, my child. They knew what they had to do. Fire. It felt brutal, horrific, but necessary. Mark retrieved the doll from the nursery, its glass eyes seeming to bore into him with newfound intensity. Sarah cleared a space in the unused fireplace in the main living room downstairs, away from the concentrated energy of the nursery. As Mark approached the hearth, doll in hand, the temperature in the room plunged. A low, guttural moan vibrated through the floorboards. The lights flickered violently, then died, plunging them into the dim grey light filtering through the dirty windows. A whirlwind erupted. Books flew from shelves, chairs scraped across the floor, and the front door slammed open and shut with terrifying force. Emily's enraged, heartbroken sobbing filled the air, a tangible wave of despair and fury washing over them. Sarah screamed as the poker beside the fireplace lifted into the air and hurtled towards Mark, missing him by inches. He flinched but didn't stop, tossing the doll onto the log Sarah had hastily arranged. He fumbled with matches, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The first sputtered out, the second flared, just as a decorative vase launched itself from the mantelpiece, shattering near his feet. He touched the flame to the kindling. It caught slowly, hesitantly, as if the air itself resisted. Emily's cries intensified into a piercing shriek. The flames licked at the doll's yellow dress, then engulfed it. The porcelain skin blackened and cracked, and for a horrifying instant, Sarah thought she saw the doll's painted mouth stretch into a silent scream. A final, soul-wrenching wail echoed through the house, rattling the very windows, and then silence. Abrupt, absolute, deafening silence. The fire in the hearth crackled, consuming the last vestiges of Lady Eleanor, and the oppressive presence that had suffocated them for weeks was gone. The silence pressed in, vast and empty, where moments before there had been only chaos and spectral rage. Ash drifted from the fireplace, coating the floor around the now dying embers that had consumed the doll, and Emily's tormented anchor to the world. The air, thick with the acrid smell of smoke and burnt porcelain, felt strangely neutral, stripped bare of the cloying dread that had permeated the house for weeks. Sarah collapsed against Mark, burying her face in his soot-stained shirt, tremors racking her body. A release of terror, exhaustion, and a grief she couldn't explain. He held her tightly, his own body trembling, staring blankly at the fireplace where their nightmare had finally ended. There was no discussion needed. Their dream of restoring the old Victorian house had died with the flames. They couldn't stay. Not after the whispers, the fear, the violation. Not with the memory of Emily's rage and sorrow etched into the very walls. Over the next day, moving like ghosts themselves, they packed only essentials, leaving behind the tools, the paint cans, the half-finished projects. The house watched them, silent and indifferent now. Each empty room echoed with the phantom sounds of their shattered plans. As Mark closed the front door for the last time, the click of the lock sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet street. He didn't look back, guiding Sarah towards their car. Weeks later, in a small, sterile apartment across town that smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, Sarah was unpacking the last box. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Mark was at work. It was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to breathe, to believe they were truly safe. As she carefully placed a book on a shelf, a faint sound drifted from the hallway, a soft murmur, barely audible, almost like a breath. "Mama?" Sarah froze, her blood running cold, her eyes darting towards the empty doorway.